Up YouTube? Today we are going to be discussing the historically accurate events in Exodus. So, very good movie, The Prince of Egypt. Not completely accurate, obviously, a lot of artistic license, but the plagues, very much how it happened. The way God spoke to Moses, very much how it happened. So, I would say this is probably one of the better renditions of the book of Exodus. Much better than the Ten Commandments, where it doesn't seem like God is speaking to Moses as he does in the Bible, where Moses can very closely hear his voice. But in the Ten Commandments, it was more like he felt God as opposed to hearing God and obeying his instructions. So, let me just give a quick recap of the Exodus story. It starts off with the Hebrews are enslaved. They used to be very popular in Egypt in the days of Joseph and his brothers, but over time, maybe because they stopped giving burnt sacrifices, maybe because they weren't following the laws that they were given very closely, at some point they got enslaved. The king turned against them, whether a different king dispossessed Egypt or whatever the case may be. At some point, the Egyptians turned against Israel. They were no longer honored guests, but now they were more like a nuisance to be dealt with. So Israel fell into a very low state. God allowed this to happen to them to test them for whatever reason. My guess is that they weren't, they became puffed up. They became proud. They forgot about God. They stopped giving burnt sacrifices. They stopped being strict about the laws that Abraham had received, which are very similar to the law of Moses, just fewer details, no Passover, things like that. But essentially, they're enslaved. And at some point, it didn't happen to Moses' older brother Aaron, but it did happen in his generation. Pharaoh decides to kill the males. All the male children are put to death because of Pharaoh's ambitions. Some believe, there could be apocrypha on this, that Pharaoh received a vision or a dream, and the meaning of this vision was that a savior would be born to the Jews and that he would deliver them from bondage, similar to how Jesus was almost killed by Herod, and similar to some stories, some apocrypha, some rabbinical tales about Abraham as well, basically escaping the hands of King Nimrod. So Moses grows up in the Pharaoh's palace. He is adopted. He is found in the Nile River by the woman, and he is taken in. She must have known he was Hebrew because he ends up finding out he was Hebrew. I'm guessing he was circumcised. That's how they found out. Whatever the case may be, at some point he defects and he joins the Hebrews and he sees one of his fellow brothers being killed. This happens in Exodus chapter 2. So the book of Exodus lacks a lot of details. God promised us he would preserve the law, but many of the details we must have lost them around the time of the destruction of the first temple of Solomon. So he slays a man for abusing one of his brothers. It wasn't like in the Prince of Egypt where it was an accident. No, Moses murdered a person. And when Moses realized that his murder was well known, he fled before Pharaoh could kill him. And he runs off to the deserts of Midian in the land of Arabia. And this is where he encounters God for the first time. It's currently known as Jabal Machla, Saudi Arabia, which is in the land. This is Mount Sinai, this is Mount Horeb. This is where he encounters the burning bush. The angel of the Lord, the messenger, Malak, angel, messenger, same word. The angel of the Lord in the burning bush, who speaks in the first person as God. What is the voice and what does the angel of the Lord tell Moses? I am. What does Jesus say before Abraham was? I am. So it seems that this burning bush, this angel of the Lord, was Jesus speaking in the first person on behalf of his Father, because him and the Father are one. Jesus temporarily, partially separated himself from the Father to become flesh, to fulfill the ambitions of, to fulfill God's master plan, to die on the cross and to take his throne. And then he returned to his Father. There still probably is some level of separation because, he's bleeding in heaven. In Revelation, it says that he looks like a lamb who has been freshly killed, that his robe is drenched in blood. So there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. There will be full reconciliation. Jesus stepped down from his throne to reach us, and he's going to take us back to the Father in the very end. So, Moses, he meets God. God says, tell Pharaoh to let my people go for 3 days to give burnt sacrifices. That was it. It wasn't to let them free from slavery. It was to let them go free for 3 days to give burnt sacrifices because they had not done this in a very long time. And God told Moses, and if they do not agree to this, there will be plagues, and show them these signs so that they know this comes from God. So at this point, nobody had known, nobody knew what God's name was. And then he tells him, basically, his name is Yahweh. I am that I am. So at some point, Moses becomes familiar with the name of God, which is Yod He Vav He. And so he goes to Pharaoh, and there are two magicians, Jannes and Jambres. That seems to be their name according to Paul in the New Testament. Paul writes about this. There's much apocrypha that talks about it. Apparently, Jannes and Jambres were the sons of Balaam, son of Beor, who I believe is of Aramea, which is like Syrian. So a Syrian wizard, Balaam, and his two wizard children basically withstood Moses. And Moses goes to Pharaoh. Moses turns his stick into a serpent as God instructed, and the two magicians, Balaam's children apparently, Jannes and Jambres, they also turn their sticks into serpents. So Pharaoh doesn't go for it. Pharaoh increases the labor. Moses goes to God and he complains to God, like, why have you... First he said, I don't want to do it, send somebody else at the burning bush. Then he says, why are you treating these people so horribly? Everything's getting worse. Why are you doing this to your people? So in the beginning, Moses was like anybody else, complaining to God and weak. Oh, you have little faith, as Jesus used to say. But over time, the plagues become more severe. Pharaoh agrees. Pharaoh changes his mind. Pharaoh gets another plague. Pharaoh agrees. He changes his mind. Another plague. And then finally, we get to the Passover. Exodus chapter 12, the Passover is a very important day. This is the day that Jesus was crucified. The very same day, the Nisan 15, I believe it's Nisan 15, the day of the lamb. When you eat the lamb, that's the day Jesus was crucified. So this basically breaks the resolve of Egypt that the firstborn of every household is dead. And then Pharaoh finally lets Moses and the Hebrews go free. And a mixed multitude also leaves with the Hebrews. This mixed multitude, it seems like these people never actually wanted to believe in the God of Moses. They wanted to sabotage it. They thought, let's get revenge. There's been an ancient war against Judaism, an ancient war against Israel. And remember what God did to Pharaoh. Not just the smiting of the firstborn. Yes, look at these plagues. Look at this. Look what God did to Egypt to save his children. Turning the river to blood, locusts, everything. This is for Israel. This is for the law of Moses. This is for the prophets. This is for the Messiah. This is for God's kingdom. And there are many imitations of this. Muslims say all day long they believe in Moses, they believe in Jesus, but they don't. They follow a false doctrine of what they taught. They don't follow the law of Moses. They don't believe Jesus literally said those things. If Jesus returned right now and told the exact same thing to the Muslims that he told to the Pharisees, the Muslims would try to kill him. So that should tell you exactly what side they're rocking with. So once they leave, Pharaoh's heart is hardened again, and he raises an army against the Hebrews, and they chase him to the Red Sea. God opens the Red Sea. He parts the Red Sea, and they cross it on foot. Pharaoh and his men chase after them, and the Red Sea collapses back in on them, and they all drown. I believe Pharaoh drowned as well. I'm not 100% sure on who exactly was killed and who wasn't. But basically, the hand of God was shown against his enemies. And who are the enemies of God? The enemies of God are the enemies of Israel. What is Israel? Israel is those who follow the law of Moses and those who honor Christ, the Son of God. So they crossed on foot. Moses sings a song, Exodus 15. He's bragging, not even bragging, he's just like touting, like God is a man of war, Yahweh is a man of war. And the Edomites will see and be afraid, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Philistines, like all these different groups. He's like, the Canaanites will tremble. And it's like, yeah, they know that your God is the true God. They saw what your God did. The Hebrew God is the true God. And Jesus is the Hebrew God made flesh. And we must obey. We don't have any choice but to obey. To not obey is the sin of witchcraft. Samuel told this to King Saul. To disobey the voice of the Lord is akin to witchcraft. So once you know Yahweh is real, you have no real choice but to obey his edicts. And this is how Israel became so powerful. And this is why God protects Israel for all these days. Ever since then to now, God is still with Israel. Yes, he turns his face from them sometimes when they become wicked, but he always takes them back again. So Moses tells the children of Israel that God is going to appear to sanctify themselves, to cleanse themselves, to do some religious ritual stuff, and then God will speak. And this is the Ten Commandments. You can read about this in Exodus 19 and 20. A giant flame melts Mount Horeb, Jabal Makla, blackens the tip of it with igneous rock. So a giant mountain, not a volcano, a mountain is blackened with this powerful flame of God speaking. And he speaks the Ten Commandments. I am Yahweh your God. You shall have no other gods. Rest on the Sabbath. Keep it holy. All these Ten Commandments, God speaks it from the flame. And everybody agrees to follow it because they're afraid. And unfortunately, they didn't keep their end of the bargain because Moses goes up the mountain to talk to God, to see him face to face. God sees the glory of God, not completely. He only sees part of it. God basically shows him his radiant image, and it almost, it basically makes Moses glow like an angel. Moses became a higher form of human, and they had to put a veil over his face because his face was scaring them. But while he was up there for those 40 days, the Aaron made a golden calf for the children of Israel, which is horrible. Aaron probably should have been put to death for that. Moses was very much, he's like, please, God, have mercy on your people. Don't kill them. And he kept doing this to God over and over again, pleading with God not to kill his people. And, it's like a lot of these people were fighting against God from the very beginning. It would be so easy if they would just obey. If we all just take the literal word of take the word of God literally, take the law of Moses literally, take the words of Christ literally, and abide by them and teach them and live by it, everything would go so smoothly forever, forever and ever and ever. Everything would go smoothly. We wouldn't have all these problems. We'd have a peace on earth. We'd have a kingdom similar to Solomon's kingdom, where everybody would be wealthy, gold would flow like water. I mean, there was never a civilization as great as Solomon's kingdom, and we could have it again. So Moses comes down from the mountain. He sees them worshiping the golden calf, giving it burnt sacrifices, saying, "This is your God, Israel, that took you out of Egypt." And Moses gets angry. He breaks the Ten Commandments, the stones, and he goes back up the mountain, fasts another 40 days, and God speaks to him and tells him basically, he gives him another copy of the Ten Commandments. A lot of the people who worship the golden calf, I believe, were put to death. There was a battle, basically like a civil war. And so there is an element within Judaism that is hostile to God, and it pretends to be of God, but it isn't. And this is the same element that killed the prophets, killed Jesus. It's like Judas. Judas was in the midst of Jesus, but God's love, God's truth didn't penetrate into his heart. He still was rotten up until he was remorseful for what he had done. Was he remorseful because he felt bad what he did to Jesus, or was he remorseful because the guilt was consuming him? And it was more like, oh, I can't believe what I did, as opposed to, I can't believe what I did to him. I shouldn't have done this to him. This is wrong that I did this. Basically, because Judas was feeling whatever he was feeling, but it could have been a selfish kind of feeling, as opposed to a truly remorseful feeling. So, whatever the case is, people have lived in the presence of God and rebelled against God regardless. And you can see that in the book of Exodus. Book of Exodus basically ends with them building a house for God, the tabernacle, doing the burnt sacrifices, and the glory of God lives in the Ark of the Covenant among Israel. And this is the prototype, essentially, for Solomon's temple. We do not have this currently. The glory of God does still live on this earth. It is in the land currently controlled by the Muslims, Al-Aqsa Mosque. But yes, the glory of God, 1 Kings chapter 9, God promised Solomon that his name and his eyes and his heart would be in that temple forever. So when the temple was destroyed, the glory of God was still there. When they rebuilt the temple, everything went right back to normal. And essentially, the third temple will be the same. The third temple will be built over where the Muslims currently worship. And if it offends the Muslims, they shouldn't have built a mosque on the holiest site of Judaism. That's picking a battle with God. Okay, the Muslims do not worship the same God as Moses. If they did, they would follow the religion Moses followed, and they don't. Worshipping one God is not what makes you a Jew. It's obeying the one God. Okay? Muslims are even further away from God than King Saul was. And King Saul disobeyed many orders from God, and he tried to kill King David. And King Saul, I believe, was killed by Philistines, who are the Palestinians of Gaza. The people of Gaza are the Philistines. Gaza, Ekron, Ashdod, Ashkelon, these are the same people at war with Israel to this day. Children of Mitzrayim, descended from Egypt. They are not Semitic. They are mongrels. Zechariah chapter 9, a mongrel race will live in Gaza. I will cut off the pride of the Philistines. So they're mongrels. They're not ethnically pure like their ancestors were. They're mixed with the Moabites. They're mixed with the Ammonites. They're mixed with the Edomites. They're mixed with the Amalekites. They're mixed with the Arameans of Syria. The Jordanians are all those other groups. But essentially, a mongrel race lives in the land of the Philistines, and they're still at war with Israel. They were at war with Israel in the days of King David. They were at war with Israel in the days of the judges. They will never stop until Armageddon. They have made a firm decision to be enemies of God. And all of the enemies of God will suffer a similar fate to Pharaoh and to Antiochus Epiphanes. I mean, this keeps happening. Do not fight the will of God because you will not win. Follow the law of Moses, read the Gospels, do what Jesus said. Everything Jesus said is what Moses said, but with a few finishing touches. The blood of Christ, the perfect Passover lamb, layer it on top of the law of Moses, and everything will go smoothly. We can conquer the world very quickly with the blood of Christ and the law of Moses. God bless you all.